Hey co-parents, are you ready to give your hair the love it deserves? Well, let me introduce you to Nature Syrup. This is going to be your go-to for all natural hair care. And when I tell you that they also have body butters that I live by, please believe me. Their products are crafted with key ingredients that are not only socially responsible, but they're safe for your whole family. Now, whether you're dealing with kinky, coily, or curly hair, or even struggling with retention and growth, Nature Syrup has something for you. So say goodbye to all of the other generic solutions and hello to a product line that I stand by. Join the Nature Syrup family by visiting naturesyrupbeauty.com and purchase today. Hello and welcome to Co-Parenting Confessions. I am your host, Alicia Price, and I am extremely excited, as always, to welcome you back. Before we get started, though, I want you to like, share, and make sure that you subscribe because we want you to continue to come back and watch our wonderful podcast we have here. Now, today, we're going to dive into what actually happens when youth or your teen or your child is dealing with depression or they have some trauma that is happening in their lives and how that might affect or influence the family dynamic. And of course, we're talking about co-parenting. So we want to dive into how does that really work when you have parents that are not in the same household trying to support and help their child to be well, healthy, stable, and happy. Also to know that they're loved. That's what's really, really important. So today I have a very special guest in the building, Javae Carroll, who is a clinical social worker and is doing a lot of amazing work to support youth who have dealt with some really traumatic experiences. And she does family therapy. So we're going to dive in and talk about all the stuff that happens within the family dynamic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say you have your own podcast, Therapy Rebranded.
I do.
And I know that you guys dive in and do a lot of really important conversations over there.
Yeah.
Do you talk a lot on your own podcast platform about family and co-parenting and different things that you're saying happen?
I don't talk as much about co-parenting, although the producer of our show likes to ask a lot of co-parenting questions. So we do get into that. But I think we do often talk about the family dynamics because I'm a family therapist. And so I'm coming from a systems perspective. And what that means is that if one person is doing unwell in a system, so a kid is in a family, I would say that that family is a system. It's usually either a symptom, so it's a result of what's going on in the family, or it's serving some purpose in the family for the child to be unwell. Yeah. And so coming from that perspective, I think about a lot of different things like that. The goal of our podcast is around accessibility. I think people get scared when they hear therapy and mental health. And so we like to take it as kind of more from a pop culture,
I love that,
social commentary angle and kind of weave in some of the knowledge that we have using more accessible language.
Yeah. I love that so much because there's so much that happens in the world where like it all applies, and we love to talk about other people's shit.
We do.
You know? And so I tell people all the time, like, what advice would you give someone else? That's probably what you should be doing, because we know how to point out what somebody else should be doing or shouldn't be doing.
Right.
As much as we say we shouldn't judge, everybody is fucking judging all the time.
Of course. And not only are we judging, but so a lot of my knowledge comes in with particular situations. However, I would never get on a podcast and talk about my clients. And so using these kind of people who are choosing to make their business public gives me that avenue to give that knowledge without breaking that trust. Because I never, ever want someone to create a session with me and think it's going to end up on a podcast. It will never end up on a podcast.
Absolutely.
So how do I use my skill set, show how I think about the world without putting someone on Front Street? I'll choose the people who put themselves out there.
Yes. Yes to all of that.
Yes.
So when we're diving in and talking about the family, I think we've had a lot of guests on the show so far where it's parents talking about their personal experience, because it's the co-parenting confessions. The things that parents aren't confessing is how their children are dealing with not being in that family system anymore, or the family system in the dynamic changing. and what mental health things might be happening or what traumatic experiences have happened in the family that might have caused that divide or that separation.
Absolutely.
Hit us hard,
Okay.
Javae. Hit us hard with what type of stuff are you seeing that are either making couples divorce and then causing their children to now have this depression, perhaps, or fall into this space of being unsafe emotionally, mentally, physically. What are you seeing happen?
Okay. So let me back up a little bit.
Yes.
So I work on an inpatient psych unit with adolescents. So when they come to us, they're in active crisis.
Yes.
We get our clients through the ER, right? So they're coming in because they have suicidal thoughts or they tried to kill themselves. They have homicidal thoughts, which means they're thinking of harming somebody else, or they have acted on that. Or there is psychosis or some other kind of brewing mental illness that we're seeing that's creating all these behavioral issues. So these are serious things, right? So anytime something like that serious is happening, it is showing cracks in the foundation, the cracks that were already there. Okay. Often people who are in co-parenting dynamics were together or had a marriage at some point. Like for me personally, my parents were never together as I remember them. They broke up before I was like 2. So my whole experience of life is co-parenting, right? Although I would say it's more, I had a single mom and I went to my dad's on the weekends. That's just that's kind of how I see it. So in terms of like things that are causing fractures, just think about a divorce or a breakup as a child. Okay. You are in this reality. There is only one reality that you know. Whether you think about it or say it out loud or have thoughts or words that can name it, you know in your heart that you are completely dependent on these 2 humans. And their stability impacts your stability. So kids are picking up on any kind of instability and it's causing mental health issues. So the marriage itself, probably before it ended, was already not on great footing. And so your kid was already feeling uneasy. Imagine feeling unsafe in the situation you have now and then having the bottom fall from under you. And now there's a new reality. And these 2 adults who don't seem like they're doing that great want you to trust that they're going to handle this other thing real well. So a lot of, I think, addiction is part of what's playing into these kids' mental health. Their parents having addiction, their parents having nasty divorces, cheating. I think financial instability is often a big part, and it really scares kids. You know, when mom's saying out loud that like the only reason she's been with dad for the last 3 years is because they can't afford the bills, and then she kicks dad out, whether that kid will say it out loud or not. They're terrified that they're going to lose their housing. And these 2 people are part of them. And so even if they're mad at dad because he cheated, in their little heart, they're afraid that dad's not going to make it on his own.
Now, wait, I love that you mentioned cheating. So a couple quick things. What percentage would you say of the families that you serve that the mental health of the child or that breakdown in their mental health is a symptom of the relationship of the parents?
At least 75%.
And people don't want to own that, right? They don't want to say like, okay, we fucked up and our shit is making our kids sick. So they come into the therapy space and then what do? Point their fingers at each other and then blame each other for the reason why their child is having these adverse experiences.
So we were talking about this before the show started, but you had asked me kind of like, what does it look like in the therapy space? And I said, often what happens is there's 2 co-parents. And when I talk to them, at least one of them believes wholeheartedly that the other parent is the reason that their kid is not doing well. So dad thinks it's because mom's running her mouth about dad. Mom thinks it's because dad's a bad parent. And he's not, your kid's not being, talked to enough at home or whatever. They are so focused on placing the blame elsewhere. And I think it comes from a place of shame. Like, what does it say about me if my parent's not, or my kid's not doing okay? And so they kind of go into victim mentality a bit of, I'm doing my best with what I have. Which is true. And the enemy, the person who's victimizing them, becomes the other parent.
And that is so hard. I love that you even mentioned too that thinking of I'm doing the best that I absolutely can, and that being okay, right?
Yeah.
That there's nothing to be ashamed about.
No.
We tell people at the Price Dynamic at my organization all the time, when you come into the door, this is an opportunity to do things different, not better.
Mm-hmm.
We say it that way all the time. Like, we're not telling you how you did it before was wrong.
Yes.
But that you can choose to do things differently.
Yes.
You know,
I do know. I work with parents, and often I hear them say, I've been trying for so long, I can't try harder. I always say, don't try harder, try different.
yeah.
So when you say
That's
that, it
it.
makes me think of that same sentiment
Yeah.
of like, it's not that I'm saying you're not putting enough energy in. It's the areas in which your energy is focused.
Mm-hmm.
That is the problem.
Yep. Like, shift that.
Yes.
So I know this is a hard topic for parents probably to really jump into or wrap their arms around of, but the idea that their child may have been suicidal or is suicidal.
Yes.
And then having to be in a therapy space to discuss that.
Yes.
Can you help us understand, like, what does that look like?
Yes.
What are the types of things that you're hearing
Mm-hmm.
in that setting?
So when I call and schedule the session, I often will call it a family. I call them and I immediately say, hey, you're so-and-so's mom or dad. I say that immediately on the phone. So I'm giving them that position of like, I know who you are. I know how important you are to them. I know your kid's struggling with their mental health. Can you come in so we can have a conversation about that? And so that's how I frame it. Because I think often if you say family therapy, people freak out.
People, well, because therapy means you're supposed to fix me. There's an expectation that you're fixing me, which means if you got to fix me, then I'm already fucked up, right? Then that means you're already telling me something is wrong with me and I need to be fixed. So,
I often, if the parents aren't together, I will have a conversation with both parents about, do you think you guys are in a healthy enough space to have the meeting together?
Yeah.
Or do you think it needs to be separate? Mm-hmm. If they're not in a space where they can be in a room together, I've diagnosed a lot of the problem already.
Yep.
That tells me how contentious the relationship is. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes there's domestic violence involved. And so it's not to put blame on the parents in the way of maybe this is the best you can do. Maybe you really can't be in the same room and be physically safe.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge the impact that has on your child. Mm-hmm. That's a huge thing.
Yeah.
So when they get into the room, if I tell them we have 2 goals in this session, we might not accomplish them. The first goal is for us to figure out how we got here to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And our second goal is to come up with a solution. What are we doing moving forward? Now, that doesn't mean fixing your kid. That means we're in crisis right now. How do we set up a plan to help your kid be successful in the community as they get out of crisis? Mm-hmm. And parents are usually on board for that because that sounds like that's all about my kid.
Yeah.
That ain't got nothing to do with me. And then we start talking about what the problem is.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of conflict comes up because everyone, yes, the problem is that this kid wanted to die or wants to die currently. However, how did they get there?
Yes.
And the kid, the parents, usually all have a different view of how that happened.
Yep. It's, the biggest thing that I see when it comes to being a parent, as of course I am a parent. Yeah. It is one of the hardest things that I have ever done was to be a parent. Mm-hmm. Just even going back and thinking to myself, like when my son turned 18 and I remember saying like, I kept you for 18 years. Like I never lost you. You were healthy. I cannot believe I've had a thing for 18 years, But when I say that to say, there's no guidelines. There's no rule book. There's nothing that says this is how you do this thing. Mm-hmm. We have to have a license to do so much other stuff in the world that is just nowhere near as important as raising a person.
100% and easier.
Yes. And so we don't know what we're doing. We're trying to do the best that we can. And being in that space where you hear that something is going terribly wrong with your child, you immediately feel like you're failing.
100%.
Like you've done something wrong. Mm-hmm. But then to dive into what the problem is, how they got there, that's now scary as hell because I have to now look at myself. Mm-hmm. I have to figure out what did I do to help this or to cause what's happening? You mentioned domestic violence. Yeah, that's huge. So in our organization, we do a lot of parenting time visits and supervised visitation for families that have been court ordered to have their parenting time.
Yep.
And many of the kids have witnessed domestic violence
100%.
between their parents, which is how they, arrived at this place. And not that because there was some type of domestic violence that they feel unsafe around their parent or don't love their parent, don't want to maintain a relationship with their parent. But now there's some safety issues.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Parents aren't able to get along. And the ways that I see kids working overtime to side in the right way, to say the right things for each parent, to be accommodating to each individual parent's needs.
Absolutely.
I watch these kids shape shift, right? Our visits are an hour and a half long, and the residential parent or non-visiting parent is the one dropping their kids off to the non-residential visiting parent. The kid that gets out of the car to come into the building is a very different kid that walks into the room to visit their parent.
Of course. Of course.
And people, the parents themselves don't want to admit that change in their kids. They don't want to admit how different their children are being and or acting with the other parent.
I'll take it one step further. They think that the behavior that they have with the other parent is a performance, and the behavior that they get is real.
Yes.
I get the real kid.
Right.
The other dad gets the fake. That's a performance.
Yes. And like, so how do you know? I had a conversation very recently with the parent. Daughter is like 2. And she was doing these things where she'd show up at the supervised visitation visits. And, she'd have snacks that her mom prepared and brought in. Well, one day she spills her water bottle on the table. And so dad takes everything on the table that got soaking wet and he threw it away. At the end of the visit, this 2-year-old goes and tells her mom, my dad threw my stuff away. And so mom calls into us and is like, what? Why would he throw her things away? I bought those things. And they're like, they were wet. And she's like, well, he doesn't get to throw anything that I paid for away. This is, my hard-earned money. And I'm like, okay. So me being me and how we operate at the Price Dynamic, I said, so I just want to be clear on what you're sharing and what you're telling me. So what you're telling me is going forward during parenting time, it's not okay for him to clean up after her. And if this were to happen again, you would prefer for her to come down to see you with her wet things.
Can I just say, I love that you left the semantics and went to the reality so quick.
Yeah.
You were like, and reality.
This is how we do it. That's the Price Dynamic. We're diving in. I want to be clear that what I'm saying is what you would like. And so she's like, yep.
Oh, she committed.
Yeah. Double down. So I'm like, okay, let's do it.
Right? She went to sleep thinking about that.
So yes. Now the following week though, Javae, this little girl comes in and purposefully this time knocks the water bottle over,
of course,
on the table. And what I know that parents don't know is that the performance that mom had last week was entertaining to her daughter. So when I tell my mom these things or little things about my dad or anything for that matter, I have the control and the power to put a battery in her back.
Yeah.
I can get that reaction out of her. So I'm going to go do it again. And so she did it again. And so then I explained to mom that this is what I witnessed. And as a result of your behavior, this is what your daughter was looking for now.
Did you sit her down what?
Oh, yes. We totally did. Didn't clean up a thing. Don't clean up a thing. Her little purse was soaking wet. Don't clean it up, and we coached dad and informed dad that this is, what's happening. And I digress, but I share that story too, because I think it's so important for parents to understand what you're saying about, the kid is that way with them, but I get the real kid.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you know? Even the same thing with kids that are really little that don't have a sense of time frame.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll go with one parent for the weekend and come back and, 3 weeks later say yesterday.
Yeah.
I saw this person, and it's like, no, that didn't happen. You'll ask the same question to your kid and like, well, where's your homework from the other day or the bag? And they're like, oh, that was, today. And you're like, no, it wasn't, so you understand those nuances and that based on their developmental stage that they're not tracking time. But when it serves you to be petty or when it serves your agenda, now time frame is segmented.
Yeah.
I trust exactly that happened yesterday. It had to have happened yesterday,
Yeah. I also think too, when I think of that 2-year-old, like there's this sense of also like, she was a little young to be doing this, but let's say that she was 4. Right? There's this sense of like, oh, well, does mommy really have the power? Like, is daddy really not going to clean me up? Let's see. Does mommy really get to tell daddy what to do?
Absolutely.
They are also trusting dad.
Yeah.
Is dad, because that's also a sweet caretaker thing to do, is to clean your daughter up, right?
Absolutely.
So is dad going to stop caretaking me because mom says so?
Yep.
I want to know.
Yep.
Like, there's so many, and what ends up happening in teenage years and adult, like preteen years, is they are smart enough to see the holes and choose to pick at them and pry them apart. And then you are teaching your child that the way to get their needs met is to manipulate people, because that's the way to get their needs met with you guys, is to manipulate you.
Exactly.
And then everyone's mad at the kid. Like, well, we raised a liar. Wait, hold on. You instilled in them to be dishonest.
Yes, as a value. As a family value. How you get your needs met and how we operate around here. This is what we do. This is the gameplay.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
And, as much as, like, there's also another dynamic to this too, which is that, like, I see kids often feeling like they have to align with one parent. So like the mom who's a victim of domestic abuse maybe feels like, I deep down, I really want a relationship with my dad, but I don't want to do that to my mom. So I'm not going to ask for what I want
all the time,
which has very long-term consequences, because you're teaching kids not to express themselves, not to ask.
And then they get to this space, like you mentioning that, because it's like the kids become the caretaker then.
Oh, it's a role reversal.
Yeah. Absolutely.
They're holding their parents in mind. They think more about their parents' feelings than their parents are thinking about their kids' feelings.
Yeah.
Which is,
say that again, please.
The kids are thinking more about their parents' feelings and the parents are thinking about the children's feelings. Yeah. And I think often, to kind of digress, but I think it's all wrapped in, and part of the Black community, that's normal. Kids are supposed to consider adults' feelings, and adults in a lot of ways don't have to consider kids' feelings.
Yep.
That ends up becoming an issue.
Yes.
But it's normal. Yeah. I mean, I grew up like be seen, not heard.
I was just getting ready to say that's so common in the Black community. It's to be seen and not heard. Yeah. This is grown folks' business. What are you crying about? Like not even being able to share your emotions sometimes, or don't be crying unless you want me to give you something to cry about.
100%.
Right? So just not having a comfort of even being able to expose, what you're really experiencing, what your real feelings are.
Yeah. And then thinking that, I often talk to parents of like, I don't want kids to run the show. I want you to be in charge, because they're coming in afraid that I'm going to tell them I want the kid to run the show. Yeah. I want you to be in charge, but they can feel heard and you can still be in charge. Like those two things can go together.
Yep.
You can hear how they're feeling and hold space for how they're feeling without even giving them what they want.
Yeah.
And I think parents skip that step. They don't think it's important to have that sit down conversation because it's not going to change the outcome, which it usually does.
Yeah.
But also, like, if it doesn't change the outcome, at least your kid felt like you cared enough how they were feeling to ask.
Yep. And to provide structure and some sense of discipline in that space, which really all kids truly do want.
They do. They want limits.
Right.
Yes.
And they want to know you care enough about me to press in that way. And like we were saying before, it's not really what you're doing, it's how you're doing it. It's like choosing to do it different.
Yes.
Like, be in the space. Yes, talk about it. Be willing to support. Show up for your children, but be willing to really do it in a way that is supportive of them by doing it different. So one thing that I want to talk about is that I have seen families where it's in a court order that the child has to go to therapy.
Yes.
There's a suggestion that parents go to therapy, or they're being told to see therapists. And you almost always have one parent who doesn't believe in it.
100%.
They're just kind of like, I don't think therapy is going to be helpful. We don't do this. I don't want to do it. There's no point in any of this, right? How do you work through that?
You have to continue to have those conversations. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. The most you can do is give it an earnest shot. You know, I think inpatient, you don't know how many recommendations I've given for continuing family therapy, right? And people don't want to do that. So there's only so much that you can do. But what I really try to instill in people is two things. One, I hope that when they come to the hospital and they do a session with me, they have a positive experience.
Yeah.
I think one positive experience in therapy at least cracks the door in your mind to the fact that possibly maybe this wasn't what you thought it was going to be. So I think that's important. I also think, if you can get people to understand that we are all part of the problem because we're all part of the solution.
Yeah.
I think getting people solution focused, even if they don't want to do therapy, is important. So maybe therapy isn't the way that you're going to get solution focused. Maybe it's something else.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what.
Yeah.
Maybe you feel more comfortable at your church. And so there's a church leader you guys can sit down and have a conversation with, or play the game that you had, the family meeting card that you were showing me. But something where you guys are all in the mind of, we're all part of the problem. We all need to be part of the solution.
I love that. Like, it is so true. If everyone would own that they have a part in the problem.
Yes.
Right? Who cares how big or small?
Right.
We all have a part in it. If you care about, what is happening for your child, owning your place or your part in that is so important. When you have, I would say, teens who are coming in and they're dealing with mental health issues, suicide has been an issue. What do you do when they don't want to go to the other parent's house? Do you see that happen a lot?
All the time.
Yes.
All the time.
Right? When it's like your health is involved, there's some safety things happening. And whose house is the better house, right? And how do you work through those types of things in the therapy space? Or what do you suggest, I guess?
Often, so I think my secret weapon, because I'm on inpatient, is that I get a lot of one-on-one time with the kids and group time with the kids. So I'm getting rapport with them, and I'm getting to see the non-performance side of your kid. I'm not seeing them. They might be performing for their peers because there's other kids around, but we're talking one-on-one. When I'm getting to the point in the conversation where they're telling me things and then saying, but don't tell my mom that.
Yeah.
Now I'm off cracked. The outer shell, right?
Yeah.
And so what it really is getting kids in a space where they trust me enough to go into a room and be honest with the parents about what house they want to be at and why. I think if we can get into the why they don't want to be at that house, we can decide if that's really a solution, right? So if maybe the reason you don't want to be at mom's house and you'd rather be at dad's house is because all your friends are by dad's house, that's not really a good reason. We can figure out a way to have some help around you being able to see friends while you're at dad's house, right? If the reason is because mom and say don't want to be at mom's house because mom and her partner are screaming matches till 3 a.m. Now we have something to talk about. Now we have something valid, right? That we can discuss. And not only that, but let's say you are going to go to dad's house for a while and not go to mom's. Because we know why you don't want to go to mom's. Now we can work towards a solution to make mom's house a better place for you to be. Because the goal is always to spend time with both parents if you can, right? So I think it's getting into the nitty gritty of why. I think if we don't get into the real why, it kind of just becomes a petty game of, I like mom better, I like dad better.
Exactly.
Which is not exactly what you want it to be.
And that's how parents would receive it, or that's how they digest it, right? It's like, oh, they want to be at my house because it's safer here. They like me better. You don't do, XYZ at your house, so they don't want to be over there. And it's not always.
It's usually not that. It's usually not that. Nope. It's usually not that. It's usually there's either like something in their day-to-day life that they can't get at that parent's house, or there's conflict and stress at the other parent's house. Or they think one of their parents needs to be the preferred parent. That's another thing. They can sense that mom or dad needs to feel. Usually it's mom. That mom needs to feel like she's the nurturing, more important one. So they'll say, oh, I'll go to mom's.
I remember when I was, I feel like maybe I was 10, 9 or 10. And I decided literally that my mom needed me more than my dad. And so when it came down to like, who are you going to live with? Or, we didn't have like a court order or any type of parenting plan or parenting agreement or any of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
It was just kind of like wherever you're comfortable, where you want to be.
Yeah.
But I knew primarily I was staying with my mom.
Yeah.
But at this time, I was going to live with my dad. And then I was staying with my dad. There were so many times where I did this processing and reassessing which parent I felt was strong enough and could do without me. And that's how I was making decisions about whose house I would live at.
Yes.
And most of the time I chose to go and be with my mom because I felt like she needed me.
Do you, as an adult now, think back on that? Do you think it was appropriate for you to be picking which house you would stay?
Not at all.
Yeah. I don't either.
Now, what I can say,
matters.
Yes. I don't think that at times it was appropriate for me to have that level of autonomy really at that age.
It feels avoidant by your parents. Like they were trying to avoid conflict with each other. So they were, we'll just let them choose.
You can pick, where you want to be is totally fine. But also what it makes me think of too is like the juxtaposition of I felt like I did have a voice though. And I was able to choose things. And so then I grew up with this expectation that how I felt and what I said matters all the time.
That's great though.
Right?
That's what we need.
That's how, the upside of it was me being able to make those decisions helped me in a lot of other ways. But the pressure of making those decisions so early, and that's the thing I would say is delaying that. There's a guy on the podcast a couple episodes ago, and he was saying the holidays, they were giving his daughter the opportunity to make a decision about which house to go to. And she was stalling and wasn't doing it. And they're trying to make, travel plans and buy tickets and do all of this stuff. And he was getting frustrated. And he's like, this is the first time I've ever yelled at my daughter. And then she yelled back like, I'm just a kid, And he was like, and it didn't make sense to me. And I said, well, had you ever thought of her making a decision might have made her feel like she had to choose one or the other of you and how you might feel about that and how sad each of you would be. So she just wanted one of you to decide and take that stress off of her. And he's like, oh, but
I love when they're in that space though, being curious and open.
And on the outside looking in, you can just kind of that's why I always tell people stuff like, what would you tell another family to do?
Yeah.
In this space.
So the downside too of being empowered in that way is I think you ingrain this false narrative into your child that they have more power or importance in other people's lives than they should. And what I mean by that isn't that they shouldn't have importance and power. They do. But I think when you're making those decisions at a young age, it can make you into kind of like a people pleaser or kind of you develop these feelings of like, I always hurt someone's feelings when I choose myself, which is never how you want. You want your kid to feel like they're supposed to choose themselves.
Yes, that's a really good point. I could totally see that happening. And I think for me, what happened was it the latter of what you said was feeling really important in people's lives.
Yeah.
Because I'm like the thing for my mom and my dad. I had no other siblings, right?
Yes.
And so there was so much importance put on my relationship with each one of them.
Right.
And the ways that they cared about what I was thinking or what I was needing. And so now in my life, it's kind of like, if you don't think I'm the absolute shit and care about everything that I fucking feel and say and consider and affirm me and say these things, then I don't have time for you.
Which is good.
Like, what?
That's you positive.
And so what's just hilarious though, that the older I get, the more that I'm just able to rattle that off and like, I don't care. Like, I need those things. And that's what I've been used to. But for a long time, I didn't want to admit those things. And I didn't even know that. I saw it as a negative.
Well, there's a whole different conversation we could have about how women are socialized to be easy. And that's not easy. So.
Yes. Yes.
That's its own.
That is really it.
That is it.
And that's what made me feel like, okay, if I say it,
Yeah.
you know, or just put it out there, like I'm gonna act this way. But if
Yeah.
I put it out there like that and own it,
Then you have the black
then
and
it
white
is
piece
not
on acting
easy.
difficult.
Yep. Being a bitch.
Yep. Yeah. God forbid you're
All
direct.
that stuff. Right. Part 2.
Yeah.
But if you could leave us with, I guess, any really important tips around if you're noticing some signs
Yeah.
of the fragments that have happened in your family system, causing issue with your child or children's mental health
Yes.
and their stability, what are some signs that parents can look for so that you're not having to always trust your co-parent to tell you, because that's a hard thing.
It is.
But what are some things that each parent could be looking for at their own home to know, to just be more in tune with that?
So I think, you know, any big sweeping changes with your kid is a red flag. So big like behavior or mood changes. So like, you know, I think one that's missed all the time is if you have a kid who's always irritated. That can be depression and sadness coming out as irritation. I don't want anybody to go home to their normal teenager and freak out, right? So this is big sweeping changes. If you've always had a moody kid, then that's just who your kid is, right? I think isolating, so spending a lot of time in their room, kind of trying to avoid and disconnect from the family. Again, more than normal. Teens like to do that. But like if you're having to drag your kid out for dinner time, they don't want to be around you. And why? You don't know how many kids come to the hospital and they're like, I spend 95% of my time in my room. And parents think they're respecting their teen's space, but the kid is reading it as, you don't care enough to check on me. You don't care enough to pull me out of my room. You don't care enough to ask me questions and keep trying. Like
100%.
Kids will push you away and they still want you to try forever and ever and ever. It doesn't end when they turn 18. And then I think, you know, eating. So like kids who have like stop really eating and having an appetite, that's a huge red flag. Those are some of the immediate things. And then I think like not wanting to socialize or do any like extracurricular activities. So like if you had a kid who used to love sleepovers and they don't want sleepovers anymore, that's weird. A kid who used to love playing basketball and they don't want to do basketball this year, that's weird. So I think like really big behavior changes, mood changes, patterns changing. The downside of that is if you're a parent who gets to see your kid once a week, you probably don't have enough data to know that. And so you are having to rely on the co-parent. And so if you get to see your kid once a week, what I would say the safest and healthiest thing you can do is foster a lot of open communication in that once a week time. Be curious about your kid. Please stop asking your kid how their day was and how school's going. Please.
Yes.
Ask them the name of their favorite
other things to
Ask
talk
them
about.
the name of their favorite friend. Ask them what show they're watching right now.
What music do they listen to the most?
Ask them how it's going at the other parent's house without the snarky piece of it, you know? Ask them about like what they are liking to eat. Do they want to try something new with you? Maybe you don't have a lot of money, but you guys, you know, make something together every time they come over. Do things, create rituals with your children that they can look forward to when they see you. Stop asking them how their day was and how school is. It was okay. It's fine.
Right.
That's it. Literally the other day was just giving, instead of telling them to listen to their mom.
I was just giving advice to this group the other day and saying things like how important it is to really get better at asking better questions and open-ended questions. And being mindful of your tone and the things that you're saying. You care about your child. It's important to practice things that are going to be helpful for your communication instead of just thinking you don't have to put any work or effort into the way that you're building relationship with them. That's the just like craziest thing to me. Like work at it. Work at being a good parent.
Generationally, that's new.
I know.
It's all new. Like I feel like everybody's trying to do something they weren't modeled. And so I try to give grace. But just show interest. People don't, you know how big of a difference it is when someone comes to your room as a kid and someone stands in the doorway versus sits on your bed?
Right.
The small things. Sits on your bed means I'm here to talk. Stand in the doorway means I'm passing by. What's up? Those are not the same.
Immediately.
Be intentional. Be intentional.
That is good.
That's what I would say.
Yes. I love this conversation so much. I have one last question. Because this just popped into my head about that sharing of information, right? So
Yes.
we know if there is a parent that has less time with their child who is struggling with some mental health things, hearing from your co-parent what's going on or what you have observed is difficult when you're used to this person possibly dictating to you, maybe, having been what you're saying as a narcissist, controlling, all of this. So now you think, oh, my child was over at their house and now all of the bad stuff seemed to happen when they were with you. That I don't see that doesn't happen on my watch, right? It's not me. But now this parent is trying to be responsible and share with you, this is what they told me, or this is what I observed. What can we say to the parent who's having a hard time receiving those messages?
Receiving or sharing?
Let's say both.
Okay. So as the parent sharing, say what you want and need. Are you saying this because you want feedback, or are you saying this because you're informing them? So that's one.
Yep.
If you don't feel like you guys are in a space where you guys can have a really healthy back and forth dialogue, I hate to say it, but maybe an email or a phone call is a better way to do it. I love actually sending an email and then setting a time to talk after. Let that person process the information you gave them and maybe have a phone call 2 days later.
Yep.
I know that requires a lot of maturity on both ends, but I'm just trying to think of ways that people, because then that person's not blindsided. They can sit on their thoughts and feelings. I think as the person receiving the information who feels like, well, that's not happening at my house, just take a deep breath, step out of shame and judgment, and remind yourself, why is my kid spending 90% of the time with the other parent?
Yeah.
It's probably a reflection of my actions, right? And that's not something you have to verbally say to the other person.
Yeah.
But I think to keep in mind that, part of the situation you're in is because of you. And if you really think bad things are happening at that house, well, you need to be in better working order with this other parent anyway, so that you guys can spend more time with the kid. So I would say, as you're receiving this information, even if you think it's the other parent's fault, think about how you can be part of the solution.
Big. When I talk to parents about these very specific things, like where there's this conflict of, sharing information, what's happening, I always tell them to try to find a space where you do agree and build from there.
I like that.
So I'll hear arguments about bedtime. I'll hear arguments about pickup and drop off time and the person being late. So I always ask people to step a level higher than the problem. Like, what is the outcome that you're hoping for? 9 times out of 10, the outcome is that they're hoping for their child to feel safe, have some level of ease or comfort in their day. And so talk about that thing. Not the thing that the parent is doing that's keeping that thing from happening, right? So always bringing it back to that. Do we agree that we want our child to go to bed at this time? Starting there. Okay, yes, we agree on that. Okay, so then when you drop off and pick up, 15 minutes late, that's keeping us from what we're agreeing to, right? And so it's like to get that initial agreement and build from there.
Yes.
I tell people all the time also that if you can get to a place where you have some shared values,
which you should, if you procreated together, you should.
Amen.
You should have had some kind of shared values at some point if you procreated.
But we know that these babies come in all different ways.
Yes.
And you may not have had an opportunity to have a conversation even.
Yeah. Me coming from a 17-year-old, I'm sure they didn't talk about that. Yeah.
But when you can find some shared values, then whatever the issue might be, whatever the struggle may, appear, you lean on those values to work through those things.
I love this.
It's not always the problem. The thing that we think is the problem is not really the problem.
No.
And in order to fix things that are deep rooted, then you have to have some core values.
This is actually a good place to end because it kind of circles back to the beginning, which is my job and what I do. So one of the best things about my job is that we come into session with a shared goal, which is safety.
Yeah.
And at least half of the parents are like, okay, I wasn't doing as well as I thought I was, and I don't want my kid to die, so help.
Yeah.
At least half of them come in from a space of humility because they're scared shitless.
Yeah.
And so we all come into the room with a shared goal, and we all come into a room usually with an acknowledgement that something wasn't working.
Yes.
Which is a great space to be in when you're starting a family session.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great shared goal.
This was good.
It was.
Thank you.
You coming on my podcast?
I am.
Okay.
I was just asked that when do I get to come? So that's great. I love it. I love it.
Let's set it up. Let's set it up. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in today to Co-Parenting Confessions. If I can leave you with anything today, it is absolutely to have a shared goal and to admit your part in the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two places where you start, and you can actually help to improve your child's well-being and mental health by doing those two things, and it doesn't cost you anything. Now, I want you, of course, to make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
So good.
MBC. No relation to NBC.